This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Eric Crittenden. Eric is a trend-following trader. He runs a firm called Standpoint Funds. Tom Basso happens to be chairman at that firm. Eric is a repeat guest on this podcast, a guest that I love to have on this podcast. We're both Gen X guys, and today we cover all kinds of territory, not just trading, life, all the social change going on, all kinds of stuff. One of those easy breezy conversations that you may or may not like, but at least it's authentic. It's two men sharing their perspectives, their points of view. And damn it, that's kind of rare these days. I hope you enjoy this podcast with Eric Crittenden. So what have you been doing to lose all this weight, though? What's the workout?
So I changed my diet dramatically. I tried to get rid of anything that human beings didn't eat before the Civil War. Pretty much all processed foods. Got rid of soda, got rid of alcohol, got rid of wheat and corn. So a lot of cheese, a lot of vegetables. I only drink water now. And I enjoy it. Actually, it feels really good. You're in Vietnam, and when you look around, you don't see any obese people.
The short answer is yes, you don't, but you definitely can start to see post-COVID, you're seeing what I might perceive as a chunkiness in some people that I did not see before.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. But it's fascinating to me. One of my pastimes is to go onto the internet and look at pictures of places I used to live. Seal Beach, California, Wichita, Kansas, Seattle, Washington, different places. And then go back in different decades and just punch in a year. And they'll show you women with their kids and the dads at the beach or someplace else. In the 70s and the 60s, you didn't see anybody who was obese. It was just almost impossible to find a picture of someone who was morbidly obese. Fast forward to today, and it seems like more than half the people now would meet the definition of morbidly obese. And it seems like it was the mid-'80s when something dramatically changed. And we don't need to get into it, but a lot changed. Our food supply system was bought out by former tobacco companies. Processed foods became very popular. People stopped cooking at home, started eating out a lot. And basically, we went from semi-healthy diet, which everyone thought it was unhealthy, like eggs and cholesterol and steak and cheeseburgers and whatnot. You didn't have any fat people back then. Now, no matter how hard people diet and exercise, they just can't seem to lose weight. So this, for me, was an experiment. If I just go back to eating what I think resembles what humans ate before the Civil War and just try to keep everything else out of the diet, will it make a difference? And it did dramatically. I also took up swimming, so that helped as well.
So I'm Gen X, you're Gen X. I'm starting to notice as Gen X guys are having their voices heard more and more, there is definitely a Gen X male attitude. And it is cut to the chase, cut through the bullshit. Don't try any of the nonsense. I'm not buying it. I'm very lucky to do this podcast to get pitched all these interesting people. And the last week I was pitched, I had them on my podcast, another Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. I had an astronaut on the podcast. But those same pitches that came from there, I also got pitches for just crazy woke stuff. It was interesting when you bring up what you brought up at the beginning of this conversation, because I was thinking, I know I'm going to talk about trading with Eric, but I'm thinking, I wonder if he wants to talk any social issues today. Right out of the gate, the Gen X is put on the plate.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Gen X because we are the smallest generation. I think I'm 51. I might be 52. Gen X, we're a tiny generation, bookended by the obnoxious baby boomers and then the obnoxious millennials, and then who knows what's coming after them. We've been silent for a long time because we're stoic. We were the latchkey kids. Mom was working, dad was working. It was pre-internet. We went to school. We were the last generation to do stuff outdoors, and you got home when you got home. There was no iPhone to track, none of that stuff. So the next generation after us, I feel like they've been surveilled their whole life, and they lacked privacy. They lacked a certain risk taking that we were able to get away with. And that is perhaps gone forever. There's unintended consequences when you change a society and a culture that radically in that short of a time period. And I think we're seeing that this lack of motivation, accountability. That word doesn't even mean anything to people anymore. They can't even give you a definition of it anymore. And that's the other thing I noticed too, is that words mean different things today than what they meant if you read them out of a dictionary even 15 years ago. Yeah, something's changed. And the social issues, I think, are a big deal. I don't know how you fix them. I think our silent generation, the money went over us, the politics. How many politicians do you see that are our age? They're all either 80 or 37. We have no representation.
I mean, I guess you would have social media presences like Musk and Tucker Carlson, but they're not politicians, but they carry weight like politicians in a way.
It's true. They do carry weight, but they're not lawmakers. They're not legislators. Do they make a lot of noise? I mean, Musk is definitely changing the world.
You said perhaps. I want to go back to that perhaps never to be experienced again, talking about the other generations. I actually had this exact text message with a friend the other day, and I posited that post 1975 until Netscape going public in 95, and potentially you could argue up into the advent of the iPhone, that there's this unique 2 to 3 decade window that will never be repeated again. And that people that came from that window will always have this different perspective and different experience. Because you're right about the risk taking. Me and my friends, we did crazy ass shit. I can think back to one friend. He died in high school and was a car accident. Whether he was going crazy or not, or was just an accident, I don't know. But I could have imagined other friends dying by the way people drove and crazy stuff that happened. But there was a certain risk taking that taught you something. And I'm not saying everyone needs to be drag racers and stuff like that. That's not my point. But you're right. Now we've got kids wrapped like the Michelin Man, unable to do anything, not getting driver's license till over age 20. Everybody wanted to get a driver's license at 16. There was no ifs, ands, and buts about it. You did it. It is an interesting period. And I do look at this 20 or 30 year window. It's not going to be repeated again. And primarily because of their surveillance. There is a camera on everything. That's just weird. To get back to your point to perhaps, there's no going back from it. The cameras are going to only get worse.
Yeah, there's no going back. As you were talking, what occurred to me is that what we had that kids today don't have is we had the ability to fail and learn from it. We had the ability to fail before it was fatal, small, medium-sized failures along the way. Now in society, if you actually make it to the point of failure, it's literally terminal, or you can't get a job, you have a record, stuff like that. So this inability to learn through pleasure and pain and take risk and get feedback from the real world, the real environment about, ow, that hurt, or there's consequences, or my reputation is stained, or these people won't talk to me now. That seems to be gone. And I think it really interrupts the learning, the cognitive development of kids between the ages 6 and 20.
You could look at a situation. I don't think it really is relevant to any particular group, but you look at these college presidents that just testified in front of Congress, and it's like, you could take any group and you're going to get that kind of response from them. And the response is not really important, but it's just you watch these people and you realize you and I are having this back and forth talking about taking risks and stuff. But there's a whole other side of the coin. They're not taking risks. They're just licking the boot. They're just joining the team. They're just signing on and they don't care to think. They're not curious. They could care less. They just want the McMansion. They just want the guaranteed job. They'll do anything for it. And they won't think outside the box, and they're never going to be you. They're never going to be me, and they don't care.
Which is why I'm glad I'm not any younger than I am. I mean, sometimes I'd like to go back to my 20s and do some things differently. But then I look around and say, the bureaucracy has become so front and center in every aspect of life now that all you can really aspire to do is be a fringe disruptor. Very few number of Elon Musk types that's going to be a cutting edge, bleeding edge disruptor, or you have to lick the boot of the bureaucracy. Those are your only two options anymore. Now I'm generalizing and there's a little hyperbole there, but that's the direction that we're headed into at a very fast pace. I sometimes feel like the window of opportunity for me to do what I do pretty much closed after I got in. First of all, inflation's amazing. I don't care what CPI says. My cost of living has doubled in 3 years. My cost of living is pretty low. I'm a single guy and I don't have a lot of interests outside of my job and swimming. But still, just the staples, everything has doubled. And all my vendors have raised prices for my business. Compliance workload has more than doubled in the past 5 years. So I just think that the barriers to entry from the bureaucracy's organic growth have gotten to the point where entrepreneurship is almost impossible. And the cost of capital has gone way up too.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point because most people that call themselves an entrepreneur today, younger people, if you listen to them closely, their idea of being an entrepreneur is to create videos and get YouTube or TikTok advertising dollars. And I was listening to Tim Pool the other day, and he said something to the effect, I want to say, maybe it was on X, and it was a couple 100 million views or something. And he's like, said he got like $3,000 to $5,000 a month. I mean, you and I could spend years and years and years to try to get to the level of eyeballs where a guy like Tim Pool is. And then it's like, whoa, for $3,000 to $5,000? Of course, that's not his business model. That's just an extra for him. But wow, the young kids today, there's one Mr. Beast and that's it.
Yeah, it really is a winner take all system that confuses people and misleads people. It's like when I was a teacher, I taught at an inner city school in Wichita, Kansas. It was a rough place to teach. And I taught business math and Microsoft Excel and database design. So the classes that the kids that had tattoos on their necks and, they wanted to be lifting weights and playing football, not learning Excel. I remember one of the only ways I could get through to the kids was to be able to relate to them. If I wanted them to learn how to write a macro in Excel, I had to make it relatable to their own life. And one day I asked them, how many of you think you're going to play in the NFL? And I think it was like 2/3 of the guys raised their hand. So I just put it in Excel, the statistics, 600,000 active football players in college or high school. And then it goes down to college. It's like only 1 out of 10 go from high school to college, and only 1 out of 20 go from college to the NFL, and only 1 out of 6 actually make the team, and only 1 out of 5 of those actually is still in the league after 4 years. So I did a net present value calculation of that to show them that winning the lottery was probably a better bet than you making it in the NFL. And I did the same thing. I asked them about, how many of you think you're going to play in the NBA? And 3 out of 12 guys thought they were going to make it to the NBA. And I said, well, that getting hit by lightning twice is higher probability than you going to the NBA. Winner take all system has now permeated up out of that area into every aspect of life. And everyone looks at social media and they think I can do that too. What they don't realize is that that's 1 out of 17 million people. And they were all trying and only one made it.
Years ago, when I did this documentary film, we went to the lottery office in the state of Virginia. And we just interviewed people, man on the street. I remember interviewing one guy that told me he was playing the lottery because that was his retirement. He was like 25. He was serious. And I remember having a battle with the legal counsel for the Virginia State Lottery, the government office, because they had released a commercial with a Jim Cramer lookalike. And I wanted the file, a freedom of information. You're not some private whatever. I want this thing you produced. Give it to me. And they went round and round and round, and we're not going to give it to you, threatening suits. It was the craziest thing. I mean, here we got the lottery, which is literally a scam, literally a state-sponsored scam. And then they reach into CNBC and steal from CNBC their scam to help the lottery scam. Yeah, a lot of people, the lottery is a big deal. It's not gone away.
It's human nature. There's 2 things that conspire against us psychologically. As human beings, we're attracted to negative expectancy lottery-like payoffs, but also negative expectancy arbitrage-like payoffs, the 2 end.
Who's this we?
All humans.
You're not, I'm not.
Well, I know. We're the weirdos.
You're controlling it in some way, and there are other people controlling it. I'm controlling it in some way. So what is the hack that's allowed you to not swallow the cyanide and go down the wrong rabbit hole and believe all this stuff? What hacked you around it?
It's when you convert knowledge into wisdom through insight. For me, it was when I learned how to design databases and collect data. You remember, I think I told you this a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. When I was in college, we had to do stock trading, a program for the whole semester where you sign up online. This was probably in 96 or 97, so it was the beginning of the internet. You get this paper trading account and you can buy and sell stocks throughout the semester. Whoever has the best risk adjusted return at the end of the semester gets an A on the project or whatnot. I built a system for buying and selling stocks based upon 52-week highs and lows. But I was doing the opposite of trend following. I was buying 52-week lows and selling 52-week highs because the backtester said that that was very profitable. And this was actually 2 semesters long, a full year long, same teacher. It was part 1, part 2 investments class. By the time we got to the end of the second semester, I was forced to confront survivorship bias, where my backtester said I made money, but my account, which was paper trading, says I lost money. And that's because there were bankrupt securities in there that no longer showed up in the backtester because they got delisted. And I was buying those as they were going bankrupt and seeing it on my accounting statements that I'm losing shit tons of money in these things. But because they're left out, once they get delisted, they no longer show up in the back test. So the back test says, no, buying 52-week lows is great because we're only retaining the stocks that bounced, not the ones that went to zero. That's when I realized that you got to think this stuff through and actually go do it, either simulate it or do it with your own money or real money in some fashion to find out how life really works. There are no shortcuts. Because you mentioned we're not like that. We're not chasing lottery-like payoffs that have a negative expectancy. And we're also not getting stuck in the arbitrage trap. Well, that's my answers. That was the beginning of my critical thinking epiphany, where I'm like, no, I've got to figure this stuff out on my own. I can't just read it out of a book and expect it's going to work. Same thing with the diet. There's the whole 6,000 fad diets out there, none of which work. None of them ever worked for me. I've never seen them work for anyone else, but they get all the press and the fame. I actually had to go learn, what did humans eat before the Civil War? Try it myself. And after a year, conclude that that works. Now, they're not writing any books about it. No one's paying me for advice, but it does work.
I would be amiss as a person who likes to ask questions to not pick your mind for the quick and dirty pre-Civil War diet that you're going to tell us that you are following. Give me the top down. What are we looking at? What is your daily eating routine now?
Well, let me tell you what I used to eat. So in the morning, I would get up and I would make a huge bowl of cereal with milk. And then I did an analysis of what was in that. One fun thing to do is just take the box, turn it over, read all the ingredients and see if you can pronounce any of the words. And I couldn't. I found a doctor who is a functional medicine doctor. I sat down with him and I went over my whole diet. And he said, well, basically, 80% of what you're eating isn't really fit for human consumption. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, like these things aren't fit for human consumption. And a lot of the stuff you're eating is illegal in Europe and in certain parts of Asia. It's actual toxic poison. So they'll have the same box over there, but if you turn it over and look at the ingredients, most of the ingredients you're reading are not in Germany and other places because they won't let their people eat that stuff. And then he told me the stuff to go read about how many food companies are there in the world. There's basically 8 that control about 96, 97% of the food supply. There's a theory out there, and I can't prove this, but tobacco companies bought up the food companies in, I think it was the late 80s or the early 90s, and brought their addiction model over into the food place and really aggressively marketed this stuff towards kids, the placement and the shelves and the grocery stores and all the sugar and all the preservatives and the bright colors and whatnot. I just took stock of everything I was eating and I got rid of almost all of it. And I changed my breakfast to 1 apple. I eat 1 apple in the morning. And then for lunch, I eat 1 piece of cheese, some walnuts, sometimes some cashews, cucumbers, lots of fresh vegetables, but uncooked that I prepare myself. And then for dinner, almost every night of the week, I just mix a bunch of stuff together. Black olives, cheese, tomatoes, cucumbers, jalapenos. I do eat bacon. I don't shy away from meat or cheese. I just don't eat as much of it as I used to. And I mix the stuff up and I try different things all the time. Gluten-free tortillas, wrap it up and eat it. I go out, I eat a lot of fish. There's a couple of fish market type places here in Phoenix. Somehow they get fresh fish here. Eat that. I cut out the rice, cut out bread, pretzels, grains, beer. Beer was a real killer. I love my beer. I love Irish beer and German beer, but I just can't do it anymore. I'm too old. And yeah, the weight just started falling off. Also, for the first time in my life, I lay down at night, I go to bed, I sleep in 15 minutes. I've been an insomniac my whole life. 2 hours is normally what it took for me to fall asleep. Now I'm asleep in 15 minutes and I sleep the whole night through for the first time in my life. So this past year has been very kind to me. You listen to what I'm saying and you think, oh, that sounds really hard. It wasn't hard at all. I feel great. Everything feels great. Like I'm not foggy mentally. I'm not hungry all the time. And then when I do cheat, like on Thanksgiving, the next day I feel terrible and I'm starving and I don't sleep well. That's the other thing. I've had heartburn in over a year and a half until Thanksgiving when I had some turkey and some bread.
Why do you think people flip the switch? I've been generally in the same range for a long while, but during the first year of COVID, I gained too much weight. Then I lost it all that same year. I mean, I work out 7 days a week. I still have cheat foods that I will touch, but overall, I don't do anything like the cereal in the morning or anything like that. What do you think it is beyond just saying the food companies have addicted us? What do you think was the exact flip of the switch for you? Because you didn't care. For some long period, you just didn't care. You didn't do it. You weren't the worst case situation that goes on in most of America right now. So when you look at these worst case situations in America, the morbid obese, I just wonder psychologically what's happened. Do they just look around and say, well, my neighbors are like that too, so I don't care? Or I think I look good in a bathing suit on the beach, even though I've got rolls everywhere and everyone else does. I can't figure out the logic of it. But I will say, having been outside of America where I don't see that, that has changed me in a way to where I don't really give a shit if Americans have lost their minds. I really don't care if they explode like the girl in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I'm in an environment where that doesn't really exist. So it's terribly complicated to try and analyze because I feel like I'm an outsider. Now I look at you and I see you on screen and it's like, oh shit, something changed in this man's life. He went full on fit. You just see it and it's like an instant no, I know what's going on. But I can't have this conversation with most people in America. And when I go back to America, I was there in September. What do you say to people? You can't say anything. It's their life. A lot of people that I know in America, they've got a decent chunk of money. They got their house. They got this and that. But they're just woofing down alcohol like it's going out of style. They're just gaining. I just can't wrap my arms around it. And it's not spoken about honestly as to what's really going on. And maybe we really don't know.
There's lots of fault to go around, lots of blame. One, our healthcare industry in the US just does not care. It's why I found a functional medicine doctor, because everyone else I talk to is just like, oh, yeah, statins, injections, pills. Don't you even care what I eat? Don't you care how I spend my time? You don't care about root causes. And they're like, well, I mean, yeah, that's important if you want to talk about it. I'm like, what? Okay. And then you talk to a functional medicine doctor, and the first thing they want to do is do a full diagnostic on your blood and your food allergies. And they ask you, how do you sleep? What do you think about at night? How's your life? What do you want to fix? What do you want to change? They want to know whether you're your own worst enemy in your lifestyle choices before they start talking about surgery and statins and pills and all kinds of other stuff. So there's that. I think to answer your question, perspective is important. My mom moved back to Oklahoma, near where we're originally from. I think that was 3 years ago. And I finally got out to visit her last August, and she'd already been there for 2.5 years. I love the Midwest. I really like the people. That's where I was born and half grew up. But I was horrified when I got there because there's absolutely nothing to do but eat greasy foods and watch sports. There's no gyms. And I had taken up swimming. I tried to find some place to swim laps, and people looked at me like I was from a different country. They're like, what's that? There's no swimming. There were no gyms. Nobody does anything outdoors unless they're fishing or hunting. It's just a very sedentary lifestyle. And then I looked around for some healthy food to eat. There were no grocery stores, Mike. None. It was just Walmart. There were no grocery stores left. And I drove all over the county and to other places. You go to Walmart or you go to Dollar General. That's it. And I went to Walmart, I went to Dollar General, and I looked around. It's all processed foods, sugar, sodium, just absolute trash, the kind of food. So you're just surrounded by it. It's like living in a place that has lots of air pollution and complaining that I have asthma. Yeah, you do. You're breathing in pure air pollution on a daily basis. You have to get out of this environment. So I forced my mom to move back to Arizona. I bought some real estate down in southern Arizona in a green area where there's plenty of healthy food around and lots of outdoor activities. But that perspective, I just didn't know that the Midwest had devolved into such a state. And it's not just the Midwest. I'm sure it's other places too, the South, the Rust Belt and whatnot. It's just really hard to be healthy when there's no opportunity around you to be healthy.
I probably used far less analysis than you when I landed in a place like Saigon. It was just a simple heuristic. Women are thin, women are hot. Women are thin, women are hot. Okay, I don't need to know what's going on, but I will just do the simple heuristic. Thin women. Okay, I should stay here. It's not complicated.
I get it. Well, there's something to be said too. When you go around the world and you look, where are people thin? It's places that haven't adopted our food bottle and our food distribution system. It's not China anymore. I think the last stat I saw there is they have a 51% obesity rate in China now because they adopted our food model back in the mid 90s. And now there's a KFC on every corner. So Vietnam evidently hasn't done that. There are parts of Europe that haven't done that, parts of South America that haven't done that. The evidence is right there in front of you. Our food model, our sedentary lifestyle, and our reliance on prescriptions and drugs to deal with our symptoms, that mentality is wrong.
Let me shift you. I want to bring up, because people might be thinking, well, hold on, I thought this guy Eric was running a trend following fund. I posted something the other day. Well, someone asked a question on X and they said, describe Bitcoin in 3 words or less. And I said, momentum either way. Because if you look back on it now, after all these years, all the fanboys and stuff telling me about it's going to be a currency and it's this and it's that. And I think, no, it's just momentum either way. What is it? It doesn't matter what it is, does it? I mean, really?
Yeah, what went through my mind is this the savior or goat. It's either going to be a savior or a total failure.
But from a trading perspective, does it really even matter?
No, it doesn't. People ask me that all the time. When are you going to add in crypto assets into your fund? And my answer is, well, it's a tough question to answer because I got half my clients saying, don't you ever put that crap in the fund? And the other half saying, why is it not already in the fund? What is wrong with you? And I have a great answer for both of them. As soon as it becomes liquid enough to be a risk transfer market, it'll get added in and we'll trade it according to its underlying liquidity like we do everything else. So if it actually becomes something useful and accretive to society, which I suspect that it very well might, it'll be in the fund in its proper form and size. Until that day, I'm not going to screw around with it. I'm going to let the pioneers pioneer it. I'm a settler. So it has to work, it has to be established, and then I will go in there and provide liquidity to hedgers, follow the trends, manage my risk, and be happy that it's in there. But if it doesn't make it, it doesn't make it.
Here's the interesting thing for me when I look at it. I don't know if working is even part of it anymore. It just seems like we've created a way for people to bet, almost like some of the descriptions. It's not a derivative, but some of the descriptions that they would have explained in the Big Short movie. Well, we're making a bet on this bet. It seems like with Bitcoin in particular, there is no there. It's just, I guess some people have got an imagination about it becoming something, but it sure looks like to me that a significant portion of that capital could care less. It's just, hey, if I'm long up, I'm down short or I'm out or whatever. So to me, it doesn't seem like it's anything other than just an opportunity for people to bet, which is quite different, of course, if one understands the futures markets, because the futures markets, there was a purpose behind these contracts that were created. There was a fundamental purpose for why they exist, starting with the hedging and the hedging needing speculators to play too. So Bitcoin, if it is just something to bet on, it's quite different at the scale it's starting to unfold and the numbers of people that are getting involved, where it doesn't really seem to have any economic purpose. Does it?
Well, it could. In order to sustain and thrive and scale up to a level where I'm adding it into the program, I think it does have to catch on some level.
Catch on in what way? What do you mean catch on?
Well, it's going to have to become popular and accepted by the actual business community in order to scale up such that the liquidity on the futures exchange is going to be high enough for me to add it to the portfolio. So just like every other futures market, you're old enough to remember all the futures markets that launched in the 80s and 90s that never made it. There just wasn't enough demand from hedgers or speculators. Speculators don't matter. If the hedgers want it and they're going to use it, it'll be liquid. And the speculators will start to pursue it. If they don't want it, it'll die on the vine like 60% of all the futures contracts that have ever existed in the past. Rice and lumber and some of these other markets just don't have any demand for them. And that's why they're so small and probably on their way to going out of business. Whereas the fixed income markets are enormous. The currency markets are enormous. So it's supply and demand for risk transfer.
Can Bitcoin just exist as the grand continual pump and dump? Is there enough people to just keep buying in? And from a trend following perspective, why care?
Yeah. So our role in the ecosystem is to not care about that. It's just to participate and provide liquidity. But if you scale your participation to the liquidity, the only way it'll be meaningful is if it actually does catch on and people start using it actually in the economy in some form, whether it's a currency or a store of value or whatever it ends up being. It needs to solidify and grow in order to start showing up in the futures markets enough for me to add it to the portfolio. And that's to be determined. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm starting to suspect that it will, but the governments are a formidable opponent. And if they don't want it, it's not going to catch on. So there's going to have to be some mechanism by which the government says these things serve a purpose and we're going to allow them.
I could imagine it getting bigger than almost any other asset or any other stock. And I could imagine it having no economic purpose other than the grand casino where everyone's just betting. We're 10 plus years into it, and that's all it is.
The people that are truly passionate about it would push back on that and say, no, there's a lot more to it. They have a whole ecosystem that solves all kinds of societal problems regarding trust, bureaucracy, politics. All of these things can be addressed with it. And I'm certainly not an expert. They try to tell me their stories all the time. And I say, hey, look, my job is to trend follow on futures markets and combine that with traditional assets to try to offer an all-weather experience for investors. So I don't have time or even the skill set to make a judgment call on whether this stuff's going to work. The futurists, you're going to do your job. You're pioneers, I'm a settler. So go pioneer, figure it out, make this thing work. I will participate. But it won't shock me at all if they're right. Things don't usually last this long unless there's some structure to it. To answer your question, can it just be a perpetual pump and dump? We'll look at some of these stocks that have no fundamentals that people have been pumping and dumping. I don't want to name tickers or whatnot, but you know that there's some of these meme stocks and theme stocks. How long can they go on? It's been dragging on for 5-6 years now. But I haven't seen it go on historically for much longer than that. The things eventually go bankrupt and get delisted and someone else takes their place. So I don't know what to think about crypto other than my job is to trade it if it's liquid. So far, it hasn't gotten there, but it's getting close.
Yeah, I'm not trying to give any kind of negative fundamental perspective. I don't know either, but to me, it just looks like something. It's the price action just says up and down, up and down. If I just look at the price action, that's the only conclusion I can draw, because as of right now, there's no use case for me that I can easily access and easily use in my life.
Well, what do you think about the fiat currencies right now with the amount of money printing and spending being debased? How much longer do you think that they could do that indefinitely? I mean, the laws of the physics of finance, what's your recourse? Tangible assets? The Bitcoin and the crypto people would say, well, that stuff's dying. This is the future. The government can't print more Bitcoin, so you need to come over here.
That's what they're saying, but
yeah.
If it's going up, then what they're saying, well, that makes sense. But if it's going down, that's the hard part about the fundamentals of it. Let me ask a trend following big picture question. Is trend following as fringe today as when you and I first met close to 20 years ago?
In practical terms, yes. There are a few firms have rolled out products. You see more options. There's more accessible product, but I don't think that they've actually made a dent in the world. So maybe, let's say, 0.25% of managed money was trend following when you and I first started talking, 15 years ago. Maybe that's doubled. It's changed. There's a little bit more acceptance, but nothing meaningful, in my opinion. So it is just so counter to the way humans experience life. I have a saying, and I haven't said this in a while, but in practice, trend following is as contrarian as anything you'll ever do. Ever. From the way you're buying strength, you're selling weakness, maybe you're adding to winning positions. If you just take a person off the street and give them some money and a terminal and tell them to start trading, they're like a cat. You know exactly how they're going to react to certain stimuli. Like if you bring in a cat and I bang two symbols together, it's going to run off. Bring me another cat and he's going to run off. The 1,000th cat does the same thing. Humans are the same way with their money when they're trading. Not exactly, but I mean, it's very similar. They add to losing positions. They sell their winners too early. They take more risk on losing positions. They double down. I call that the principles of professional trading. They just do everything wrong. Trend following is essentially taking that like a sock and turning it inside out and saying, I'm going to do everything right. But psychologically, there's a reason people do everything wrong because it feels better in real time. It may not feel better at the end when you look at your account balance after a few years, but in real time, it feels better. Kind of like eating that pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving, like I did a few weeks back. It feels good in real time, not so great at the end.
The Wall Street system doesn't make their money by and large from trend following. They make their money by and large from fees on rather sedate mutual fund type buy and hold strategies. That's where the vast majority of assets are. There's no real incentive for Wall Street to do something good. Their goal is to make money. I would argue that's part of the disconnect is the average person doesn't realize what the average fund manager is up to, what their goal is, and what they're motivated by. It's not them.
Yeah, something I say that pisses off the trend followers from time to time when we get into this topic is I tell them, not everyone can be a trend follower. It's not possible. The trend following community has to be a pretty small minority of the assets in order for it to work. Imagine if everybody in the world wants to sell soybeans because it's hitting a 52-week low. It's not going to work. You need more people on the other side actually economically able to absorb that risk when you want to get rid of it. Likewise, you need them to sell it to you when it's at a 52-week high. You need more than 50% of the pressure on the other side in order for it to work, for that to be in balance over time. I manage a lot of money, and there's people on the other side of the trade. I don't think they're dumb.
They have other motivations. There could be hedging motivations, et cetera.
Exactly.
Let me shift into something else. I think it's one of the favorites for Jerry Parker pushes on a lot, which is the notion of volatility and targeting volatility. It's interesting for me because I guess when I first started to understand trend following, it didn't appear to be a thing. But I guess at some stage of the game when for the very large trend following funds, and there have been some very large ones, I guess when some of them agree to accept assets from very large allocators, there's strings attached, perhaps. I'm just theorizing. They look at these trend following return streams. They imagine, how can we carve this up and present it in a way that is more palatable to us? They lose sight of how it even happened. They want to make it conform to what they imagine is the great investment, whereas the trend following return streams that got them that money to begin with came in an entirely different way, and they want to bastardize it. What's your perspective? You hear someone like me just rattle all that off.
I think it's mostly right. We're a little too harsh, I think, on the allocators, maybe.
I've met some of these ones that run these public pension funds, and I'm telling you, I don't want to keep saying bad things about them, but I could say a lot of bad things about them. They're not impressive people, a lot of them, when you meet them in person. They're apparatchiks, they're bureaucrats, they're in political positions.
I'm not going to disagree with that. It is a bureaucracy. They need to be diplomatic first and foremost, and they're stuck in between the board and they have the investors and whatnot, and that's not a position I would want to put myself into. So there's also the illusion of progress phenomenon where you have to always look busy. You're always doing research, you're always coming up with new stuff, and you got to justify, alpha and all this other stuff. I got out of that game a long time ago because there's just so many misincentives, and just told people the truth. And they're like, look, you can't be that blunt. And I said, well, I'm going to. So eventually I said, I'm just going to do my own thing and find advisors and individual investors that want to invest this way. And just because I never conformed to the politics. It's rough when you don't network into the bureaucracy. You can't really benefit from the bureaucracy. So I know Jerry Parker. He's a good guy, smart guy. He's been doing this a really long time, and he's got really strong opinions on these topics. Most of my opinions align with his because he's just generally right. On this particular topic of like vol targeting and stuff like that, I'm not as passionate about it as he is. I think there's 5, 6, 7 different ways to get to the same destination without doing anything crazy. I personally don't like vol targeting and that stuff. I like risk targeting. My philosophy on it is volatility is not risk. Volatility is a symptom of risk. So if you're going to position size or manage to a certain level of volatility, well, you're prioritizing symptoms. I prefer to ignore that and go straight to the risk and say, how much am I going to lose if everything goes wrong on all these positions? I want to regulate that number. And volatility is just an extra step that's somewhat convoluted, in my opinion. Am I vol targeting? No. Am I maintaining some sort of a risk budget? Absolutely. And so is Jerry Parker. So some of this is semantics. I think what rubbed Jerry the wrong way is that I think he got a lot of pushback during his years at Chesapeake from allocators saying we need the most sophisticated vol targeting crap out there. And he's rolling his eyes saying it doesn't make a difference. If you manage your risk, you're doing fine. And they just wouldn't buy into it. They needed the buzzwords and he didn't have the buzzwords.
There's something else interesting as I bring up Jerry's name and okay, people are listening to you. You're not shy about personal opinions either. What's interesting about both of you, and okay, I'm not running a fund, but I have no problem sharing personal opinions either. But if I share personal opinions, I remember saying something to somebody on a podcast once and some professor, and I said something about go woke, go broke. And they go, what does that mean? I was like, well, what do you mean? You don't know what that means. But how do you think you have evolved to the place where it's like you are a trend following fund manager? You will, assuming it's a legit client, you're not discriminating against accepting clients. But if you put certain views out there, like, hey, this is the way I see life, I mean, you might attract only a certain type of investor. Same thing with a guy like Jerry. Same thing, even in my world. Some people might turn on my podcast. They might hear some F-bombs. They might have just been to church and they're like, okay, that's the last time I listened to that guy. So how do you connect the dots there in the sense of, because I don't think when I first met you, you would have been so open about your personal philosophies, but you are now.
Well, I'm older, I'm wiser, and I realize that authenticity matters a lot and you can't make everyone happy. So whereas I had to be more diplomatic early in life, when you don't really want to be that diplomatic, it wears on you. So I'd rather just tell it like it is. And if I lose clients over that, then so be it.
On the flip side, though, you might gain clients because you are presenting that point of view as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually what's happened. So maybe I'm just overconfident because I've gained clients by just being more candid with my views.
You also have a chairman, I believe, who's pretty open on his views too. Tom Basso is not shy about points of view.
Yeah, Tom's not shy. He's got the American flag shirt and the cowboy hat on, so he's not shy. And he celebrates the 4th of July. And yeah, he's not holding back. I don't know. I just got more comfortable. My views are a little bit different than they were when I was younger because I'm older and wiser now. And I'm just not ashamed of my views and I'm willing to defend them. A lot of people aren't. You talk about the woke crowd, they just scream. I don't see them actually defending any of those views. I'd listen, but they just scream and try to intimidate because it's worked. But they have incoherent views in a lot of cases. Not all of them. I mean, some of their gripes are grounded in reality, and I'm more than willing to acknowledge those. But the behavior that I see on college campuses today is nuts. Even if it costs me every client I've ever had, I'm not going to agree with that stuff. Just can't do it.
I find fascinating that what people would generally call liberal comedians, Jerry Seinfeld, Bill Maher, refuse to do college campuses now. And that's fascinating.
It is. It's getting to the point where I was just chatting with someone before I got on this podcast. It's like a circle shoot now. You got a lot of billionaires pulling their money from college campuses, liberal billionaires. Wait a minute, these people are actually attacking each other now. I spent a lot of time when I was younger studying revolutions.
Can America have a civil war again? I want one.
I don't.
Eric's like, hold on. I got to get off this call with Mike. If he's going to start talking about civil wars, I got to bow out of this one fast.
I got to live here, man. If you talk to people that came here from Iran or former Soviet places, they're fatigued and they all have the same story and they all want the same thing. Just give me some freedom and the ability to earn a living and I will not disappoint you. Listen to those people because they've actually been through hardship. I think part of the problem in America is we've had multiple generations who have experienced pretty much zero true hardship in their life, but they still got to fill all that emptiness in with negativity. So they create hardship, psychological hardship, where they just have no empathy for what hardship really looks and feels like around the world. And I think they struggle with that. And it's no less painful for them psychologically. I think that's why people drink too a lot, because when you consume a bunch of alcohol, all it does is it creates artificial exhaustion. That's what that is. And that's the reason I drank alcohol at the end of the day, because I wasn't exercising. I wasn't out working in the fields or hunting or fighting or any of that stuff. I was working on a computer and reading books. And then at the end of the day, I'm not properly exhausted like a human or a mammal is supposed to be. So I consume 4 or 5 Sam Adams or German beers or whatever, and I'm artificially exhausted. And it just didn't occur to me that this is not natural until later in life. So I think a lot of these people that don't have any adversity growing up, we talked earlier about our generations, these coddled generations, they haven't achieved anything in life. They haven't learned anything in life. They haven't gotten that natural pushback from the environment about don't touch a hot stove, don't fall off of a 2-story building. They weren't able to take the risks that you and I took and get that feedback. And now they're just confused and they're filling that emptiness in them with negativity and coming up with a narrative that I'm so oppressed in every aspect of life that I need to lash out. Maybe that's just a theory. I honestly don't know. Sometimes I feel like this is an experiment or I'm living in a simulation because I do not understand the people around me anymore.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you and I have talked quite a bit on camera and off camera. I didn't plan to, quote, live off the grid and live off the American grid. That was not my plan. I stumbled into it. But as I've said to many people over the last decade, a significant number of Americans, if they experienced what I experienced, would have made the same choice because it was an obvious choice. It was just painfully obvious. I was writing something the other day, working on a project, and I was thinking about this very issue. It reminds me the feeling, the collegial aspect amongst people, this nice feeling. And I'm not saying there's perfection in any country, any one country, but there's no doubt that when you're in a place like Asia, you feel something a little bit different. Again, I'm not saying every Asian country is perfect, but there is something sweeter that maybe reminds me of grandmothers. And I joke with women in their 20s and 30s. I'm like, look, I know you're not a grandmother, but you've got a grandmother attitude. And that's a nice feeling. And so then sometimes when you're in a place like America and everything feels like the exact opposite of that, the sweetness has been removed from society and it's anger and it's vitriol and it's combative. When you walk away from that and you stumble into a world where that doesn't exist, you're like, oh, wow, it's easier to sleep. It's easier to do everything. Just sharing back with you in this collaborative conversation, try to get people to understand these different points of view and to think about things differently. And so I just share maybe one day I'll have to write a book about this. I think it'd be a very popular book, actually.
I'll share my perspective on that. Envy and malice are in high supply these days. I've noticed that. Envy, I think malice is the child of envy, or can be. I just see a lot of envy and resentment and skepticism and suspicion where I didn't see that before. When I was growing up, if you saw someone walking towards you on the sidewalk, you weren't defensive. Now people are, especially with me. I don't look like a very nice person when people see me on the street and I got the facial hair, a little stocky. So I have to go out of my way to be nice to people. And you can just see the surprise on their face because they can tell the way I'm speaking that I'm articulate and thoughtful. And they're just taken by surprise that someone will go out of their way to say hi. I do it all the time now, almost just for fun. I just say hi to people and they're like surprised. And I notice there's a lot of people here in Arizona from California, and they tend to be the most standoffish. People from Minnesota and Wisconsin are all friendly. And if it's the Midwest, they're all friendly. These people from California, very skeptical and very standoffish at first. Now, they're not lost causes, though. You talk to them a little bit and they lighten up and they open up and they offer to help. They want me to walk your dog, stuff like that. But at first, they're just very suspicious and skeptical. And it's sad that our society has gotten to the point where baseline level of trust is no longer the default.
You brought up envy. It made me think to when I was having this conversation with a friend the other day, the opening scene of the film Patton, in that, to paraphrase, he is giving that speech. He says something to the effect of Americans loving the champion marble shooter. Obviously, no one plays marbles today, but anyways, he's essentially making the case that Americans love merit. We like a winner. We look up to a winner. We strive to be the winner. Whereas today, I don't think it's going out of my way to say this, that isn't there as much. It's there for a significant part of the population, but a significant other part of the population starts from the baseline of, oh no, I don't have to lift a finger. I'm already equal by my existence. That has no upside psychologically at all.
Let's talk about why that happened, because I'll play devil's advocate now and take the woke argument. Because I talk to these kids. I go to coffee shops. I go to the most liberal coffee shops in town. I overhear their conversations. Nice people always treat me with respect. They're nice. So I'm like, what is actually happening? Are we mortal enemies? And if so, why? A couple things I'll point out. When I was growing up, when I was in high school, after school, I could go make 16, 18 bucks an hour doing construction work and did. I did demolition, not with explosives, but with sledgehammers and stuff. I did tile work, I did roofing, painting, stuff like that. I remember thinking, man, I can't get ahead in life. I need to get a white collar job because, yeah, I could make 80 grand a year or something like that if I really dug in and became good at this, got an apprentice job. And that was all true. You get up to like 25 bucks an hour or something like that. Today, those kids don't make any more. They don't make any more than that. I know, I talked to them. The cost of living is 4x what it was in the early 90s when I was in college. Are we being unreasonable by thinking we wouldn't have become entitled brats if all of our hope was gone? Meaning, if our cost of living, we were growing up, was 4 times higher. Merit no longer made any sense to us, or at least we just gave up on it because it's so out of hand now that went to college in San Jose, California. A studio apartment now is $3,000 a month, something like that. Back then it was $600 a month, but they're not making any more today than the construction worker was making back then, or maybe a little bit more. In other words, real wages have not kept up with the cost of living. And I think a lot of these kids have just given up and they assume that the system's rigged. No matter how hard you try, you're just not going to be able to get ahead. So let's all become commies.
The baby boomers have all the wealth, statistically speaking, in America. And they were and have been in the last 25 years bailed out twice. The dot-com crash was never really allowed to happen because then we reflated in another bubble and then another one. This group that's 75 years old have got all the money, but maybe society would have been a lot better off that instead of creating the, quote, big short bubble that started off in the fall of '02, instead of creating that bubble, maybe we would have been better off letting people, especially the older people that made these decisions to invest in all this dot-com scam crap, to not be saved. Because they didn't save everybody. They just saved a particular generation. That particular generation has all the wealth now. And so you do make a fair point in the sense that this younger generation, they're not being saved from anything. And the numbers bear it out. All the generations below the boomers don't have the capital. Fair point. Complicated stuff.
It's a perspective that is thankless, though. And I've noticed this, that I say this over and over. I'm listening to their argument and I'm like, yeah, but this is what I'm thinking. Communism's not the solution. Subsidies don't solve anything. They just prolong it, but they don't understand the root cause of why they can't get ahead. And they're tired of hearing from the baby boomers. I walked uphill in the snow 2 ways with no shoes and I worked for 10 cents an hour. They don't care. No one else is doing it. It's not an opportunity for them. They're tired of hearing it. Cost of living is soaring and it's not even as bad as it is in other countries. So I just imagine how much worse it could get. But they do have a point in that I think that their hope has just been extinguished. They're bombarded with images from social media of how easy it is. Now everyone else is getting ahead and everyone else is partying and they've got a yacht and an airplane. And I think it just wreaks havoc on their spirit.
But I think also the other option that people do have is if you are alive, you can make choices. If a young person's alive, they're looking at the playing field and they feel like, damn, it's not the same. I'm not getting the same hand that these older folks got. Then they got to take evasive action at some stage, because if they don't, 5, 10, 15 years are going to roll by and they're going to be crying in their milk even more. I can't recommend evasive action for everyone in every situation, but if things aren't working, there's no trust in the system. It is a form of pull your bootstraps up. It might not be the walk up the hill, no shoes in the snow the boomers supposedly did, but young people just sitting still waiting for the white knight to arrive is probably a bad strategy.
It is the responsibility of the generation that has the luxury of wisdom to help the next generation not screw everything up. And we got that part wrong, I think, this time around. And it could be that the technological change after, say, 95 interrupted that, such that the baby boomers couldn't pass on wisdom to our generation and the next generation. Sometimes when you have a fourth turning, it's because the demographic transition is so violent and weird, and there's so much change that you can't pass the baton of wisdom off to the next generation. So they're full of resentment and anger because they can see that you have all the wealth with no idea how to invest it in them. The point I was going to make earlier when I talked about revolutions is that every revolution gets hijacked, whether it was the Iranian Revolution, Bolshevik, whatever. They always get hijacked and they end up being a perversion of what the original intention was. If we're going through one right now, that has to be the default assumption that it's in the process of being hijacked for nefarious purposes. The Iranian Revolution wasn't about religion. It was about the fact that the Shah and his henchmen had 99% of the money and everyone else was living way below the poverty line. Got to be very careful in times like this because it can go either way.
Well, the audience listening that are looking to perhaps find a nice, rational fund manager who does not want civil war, they've got you. For the audience that wants to read some books, listen to a podcast, get a little training, and fully supports the upcoming civil war, then they have me. So,
well, the beautiful thing about trend following is that it's discipline and it's opportunity seeking. And it's able to manage risk. So if we get really bad times going forward, trend following, I think, is the place to be. And if you get good times going forward, trend following generally, if it's done correctly, can get on the right side of positive trends. And that's how I prefer to live, because I realize that we live in a time of flux and great change that could lead to great things. AI and other stuff could change the world radically. We could have a good outcome out of this. I'm just saying, it's not the 80s, it's not the 90s. There's plenty of things that could go wrong. So it makes sense to be open-minded and be flexible, but also disciplined. Being flexible doesn't mean being undisciplined. It means having the discipline to change when change is warranted. So trend following, I like because it allows you to evolve as needed to survive in a changing ecosystem. And I feel like we're definitely in for some change.
I hope so. I vote civil war. Hey, Eric, where can people come find you if they want to check you out, check your firm out? Where's the best place to go?
It's super easy. You just go to standpointfunds.com. And what I would do is just scroll down a little bit and type in your email address, and you'll get our monthly updates. Just got all of our stuff in there, and you'll learn more than you ever wanted to know. But we don't spam you. We don't sell your stuff to other people. We're not in that kind of business. We're just going to send you the stuff that we think is meaty and important, and you can sift through it and see if anything's interesting to you.
It is one of those conversations for you where you are right now, at least the way I read it in your life, where it's like, hey, this is how I look at the world. These are my perspectives. And I happen to run a fund that might be able to help you. We can connect if you want. We can be friends if you don't want to connect in that way too. That's how I read you.
I think it's fair. I'll take that. The other thing I would point out is that you and I, we're Gen X, so we think our generation's the least crazy out there, but it actually might be the youngest. The actual teenagers now, 12 to 16-year-olds that I talk to have actually surprised me. They're not like the millennials. They're actually very, I'm generalizing, but they tend to be introverted and they take care of business. They're like little mini Gen Xers potentially. So don't lose total hope on America. I'm not. This phase of, I don't want to put a label on them, but you know who they are, self-entitled complainers and agitators. They need to either run out of energy or go find something to do. But all is not lost. I think the next generation after them actually has some hope.
So Eric gives the diplomatic response. I think all is lost. I think civil war is coming, batten down the hatches. Get ready, guns and butter, baby.
It won't be guns. Yeah, it'll be done.
I hope it's guns.
It'll be algorithms.
Eric, have a good one, man.
All right, man. Thank you. Take care.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.